Hi, Alina. Thank you very much for making the time for this interview. So, I would like to start by asking you to introduce yourself. Who are you, and what got you into language learning? What's your history, etc.?
Well, my name is Alina. It's very hard to describe who I am. Like, that's a very wide question. So I'm a linguistic student. I did my undergraduate degree in linguistics. I did my graduate degree in linguistics. Now I study neuroscience as a master's student. I, um, I guess I could say that I'm a polyglot because I know multiple languages. I speak multiple languages, and I'm generally very interested in language learning and languages. So what got me into linguistic is, I guess, that precise, deep passion, deep interest in language learning and how we learn languages, how languages themselves work. So that got me drawn into the field.
Mhm.
Um, yeah.
After so many years in linguistics and after doing a degree in that field and after pursuing a master's in that field, what have you learned from linguistics that has helped you learn foreign languages more efficiently?
That's a very interesting question. Just I guess linguistics generally helped me to understand the structure of languages better, how they're constructed, and then seeing similarities between languages and using this in language learning. So, like, for example, French, it's much easier to learn Spanish, right? English, it's somewhat easier to learn German. Russian, you already kind of understand Polish. So using this uh, common roots of languages for learning them. Uh, Also, knowing how, I would say that's not linguistics per se, but more like getting into the field of psychology and neuroscience, knowing how your prior knowledge helps you to learn a language. For example, um, reading a book that you already know, the content of which you already know in a foreign language that you do not necessarily know very well, is much easier than reading a book that is completely unfamiliar to you in that language that you're not very comfortable with. So things like that, and I'm using that a lot uh, in my own language learning quests and in helping people to learn languages themselves.
Yeah. Let's talk about that right now because you have a platform, a website, which used to be called LinguaPath, but which is now
Yeah.
called the Language Formula, where you have published a series of articles, mostly, among other things, in order to help people learn foreign languages better. So, what made you start this platform? What was it that made you decide? Okay, now it's I guess you had some things to share, and you felt that no one was talking about certain topics. Yeah, tell me a little bit about the journey you had with the language formula.
Right. So the journey of language formula kind of started in my second year of undergrad in linguistics. So when I launched linguapad.com, the idea behind that was, um, in part, motivate myself to learn more about linguistics and language learning, because when you have to share things, you learn things. And I was generally interested in that. And I want to improve my writing in English in part as well. And it's sometimes fun to go back in like the very beginning and just see how I wrote back then. It's horrible. Um, yeah, things like that. And then I did several very interesting personal experiments with language learning. Like, I learned French in 3 months, then I learned Spanish in 3 months, and passed language exams. So DELF, B2 for French, daily B2 for Spanish,
Mhm.
um, just after 3 months of learning. Well, just after 3 months of learning my way, let's say. Um, And I shared this particular experience of how to pass a specific test as well on my language learning platform. And then I kind of fell out of the writing routine and focused on other things for a couple of years. And then the Linguapod was resurrected as the language formula a couple of months ago, honestly. So me and my friends and partners from Australia just launched the language learning course. So that's two parts. The first part is called the novel formula. The second part is the language formula per se, which is to be launched. The first part essentially teaches you how to start reading, how to get comfortable in reading in the foreign language in just 8 weeks. So that's kind of my approach to learning languages in general. So I always start with comprehension, reading comprehension, listening comprehension, and then we go from there. And then the language formula, so the remaining like 8 weeks, they teach you getting more comfortable with reading and ultimately speaking.
Okay, so that's very interesting. So let's try to find out more about how you managed to get to a B2 level in both Spanish and French, which is quite impressive. So you say that during the first 4 weeks, you try to focus on reading a lot, and during the next 8 weeks, you try to focus more on comprehension. Tell us more about this whole process. So how many hours a day did you study when you prepared for those exams? What materials did you use? What materials are included in the course you're preparing with your colleagues? Which languages could this method be extrapolated for any? Tell us more about that, please.
Let's do it this way. So the entire course is kind of 4 months, so 16 weeks. So I split it into 4 modules, approximately 1 month per module. The first module, so the first 4 weeks, always focus on vocabulary. So let's imagine that you're starting to learn the language from zero, right? You don't know anything. So the first thing I do and I recommend people to do is to learn basic vocabulary, basic 1,000 words, essentially, most frequent words in a language. And there are obviously apps for that, multiple apps. Not all of them are effective. Most of them, well, it's a tricky thing to choose the app that's helping you to learn in the way you want to learn, because like consider Duolingo, excellent app in terms of like it's gamifying everything. It's fun. There's this owl congratulating you on every word you've learned, but at the same time you're wasting a lot of time and you're not necessarily focusing on high frequency vocabulary and you're learning things. You learn in phrases as opposed to words, which is not necessarily bad, but it slows down your progress, I would say. So I would rather learn words and then maybe see them in sentences and phrases, but be sure that I've learned 1,000 words, than learn an unknown number of sentences, which is what happened in Duolingo, which doesn't allow you to even know how many sentences you've learned. So this is it's very hard to track your progress in apps like that, and this is a major drawback. So you have to choose the right app, and I explain which apps would work in my course. Then, so you've learned your 1,000 words in this 4 weeks. And by the way, it's like, for me, it takes about an hour a day. So this first month, it's about an hour a day. You're playing with the apps, you learn, and it's usually spaced repetition apps. Most of them are. But yeah, so once you've done
So,
that,
on that point, which app do you recommend then? Is there a
well,
favorite one?
yeah, so I used to recommend, and I always used myself, Memrise. But as you probably know, Memrise has changed quite drastically in the last year. So it's no longer what it used to be. And they're kind of removing all the community content as well. And the new version of the app does not really allow you to take any control over your learning. So they created, they kind of moving towards the Duolingo side of things. So there are like modules for like, yeah, here's you in the restaurant, here's you on the train station, and like, you know, situational sort of vocabulary learning in a way.
Mhm.
And again, you don't have any way of tracking how many words you learn, so that's a problem.
Okay, interesting. I know I've never used this app. I didn't even know it existed. So I barely use apps nowadays for learning languages. But what you're saying is quite interesting because you are saying that learning words in context is in general not a good idea, that you'd rather learn words individually. But that sounds to me kind of contrary to what like Luca and Steven Krasher and Steve Kaufman and all of these language gurus say. So tell me more about that, and how would you sort of counter what they're saying, that learning words in context is always the way to go?
Well, that's not exactly what I'm saying. So I'm trying to compartmentalize the language. So first I focus on vocabulary and I try to keep all the distractions away. So it's I'm kind of focusing on the number of words per se and like word and its translation, word and its translation. So, you know, like the specific meaning. I do learn words and context, but in the next module where I'm actually using a lot of context, like module 2 is focused on reading comprehension, reading and listening comprehension, essentially. And this is where, God, how do I call it? Just give me a second, my mind blanking on the word. Basically you learn vocabulary incidental learning. So you learn vocabulary incidentally. You read, you understand, you kind of understand the grand idea of what is happening in a paragraph, what is happening in a sentence without understanding every single word. And your brain kind of extracts basic general meaning of words and collects statistics of on word usage, essentially from large quantities of inputs. So you focus on reading a lot, not necessarily translating every new word you read. It's actually counterproductive. So you really focus on like mass input, comprehensible input. And this is where you extract the meaning of the words. This is where you learn new words in large quantities. So first you focus on like learning 1,000 words that give you a basic, very, very basic knowledge of the language. And then you start reading using this basic knowledge and kind of bootstrap yourself into new levels of understanding.
But if I understood it correctly, for the first 4 weeks, you're just learning words and not doing anything else. You're just trying to cram to learn as many words as possible, like 1,000 words, more or less. Okay. Well, that must be intense.
It is. But you know, it kind of prepares you for the rest of the language learning adventure, language learning quest, because as you know, you've learned lots of languages. Like it takes time. It takes lots of time and it takes a lot of effort.
Yeah.
And like I put massive hours into learning languages. So like, yeah, I will spend 1 hour a day in the first month, but then it just goes up and up and up. So like I would spend 2 hours a day in the next 30 days just reading and listening, right? Next, I will try to up it to even like 3 hours a day. And this like massed input, a massive effort of learning languages, it's kind of stressful and strenuous, but at the same time, you get a very, very, very quick progress, and you're amazed at this progress, and it motivates you a lot. So it kind of counters a major problem of all language learners who just lose motivation in the middle of everything, and then you drop the language, and then like 5 months later, you all decided to learn like another 10 words, and then you drop it again, and it's like unstable. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's definitely true. Consistency is very important in language learning. Like it's better to do less hours a day, for instance, but for a longer period of time than try to be very intense and then risk burning out and thus dropping out. Because if you retake it after 1 year, something like that, because you are like, maybe I should have continued, then you will have forgotten many things. Yeah, I interrupted you while you were explaining the whole process of the course. So I think you, as of now, told me, okay, you learn 1,000 words in the first month, then you start reading. I think you were stuck there. Like, I think you could probably tell me what materials you use for reading. Also, well, tell me more about this second stage, the second month, for instance.
Well, second stage, like it's reading, and listening. So basically, there is a method called simultaneous reading and listening, essentially, and it is what it sounds like. So you get a book, you get an audiobook, the two should match, and then you read as you listen, right? And so audio supports your reading, kind of helps you to parse words because the first time you hear, like reading helps you to parse words because there are literally spaces in the text, right? Because the first time you hear an unfamiliar language, it all sounds like blah 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 blah. It just goes. There are no spaces. Like it's very hard to parse it, and it's one of the most fundamental skills in language comprehension and language learning. You have to know where the one word ends and another one begins. So simultaneous reading and listening kind of trains you in this particular skill. And then about the materials, this is a super important part of, well, everything when it comes to language learning, materials are everything, right? Because if you're working with something you're not interested in, it's very easy to lose motivation. If you're working with something that is too hard for you, for your current level, again, it's too strenuous, you lose motivation. So I'm using a little bit, well, lots of my linguistics / neuroscience background in choosing materials. So there is a concept of prior knowledge, which I kind of talked about a little bit already. Knowing the context, knowing the content of what you're reading, of what you're consuming in a foreign language really helps you to understand it better. It's simple. It's like if you're reading a book, your favorite book in a foreign language, a book that you already know very well, you know what's happening there, not like on every page, but in general, you can follow. You can follow. And then, okay, well, you've read it for the first time and you understood like 30% of it. I think there was an excellent YouTube video on this by Lydia. Don't remember the name, but I think she's also Slavic origin. She described the similar method using Harry Potter, and then she would say like you read it for the first time and the only words you understand is Harry Potter and Hermione and the proper names essentially. Then you read it for the second time and you understand some more. Maybe it's like 40-50% of the book you understood upon the second reading, and you read it again, you understand 60-70%, you read it again, you understand 80-90%. And then every time you read it again, you feel the progress. It motivates you because you feel like, oh, well, I've spent this 6 hours reading this book for the first time, and then 6 hours later, I'm rereading it, and I feel the improvement. And
so what you're talking about is narrow reading, right? If I get it correctly? Or not really?
Not quite. So narrow reading comes in place again later. It's a super interesting concept, but it's a similar concept too.
Tell us more
It kind
about
of plays on prior knowledge as well. So narrow reading, because it narrows the topic, narrows the.
So you choose a topic you're gonna So you choose a topic you're gonna read about. Let's say productivity in general, or science, or technology, something like that. Or
Not even that.
no?
It's yes and no. Yes and no. So for this second month, essentially, I tried to read something I've already read before, something I know very well. So it's not even grand topic that I know much about. It's more like, oh, I've read this book before. I liked this book before, so I'm gonna read it again in another language.
Okay.
And this helps. And then yes, I will try to read the same author or books on the same topic that I already know about. And this prior knowledge of the topic kind of helped me to decipher the rest of the language. But yeah, the concept is narrow reading.
Okay.
Ultimately.
But that comes later in your process of learning a language, maybe in the third or fourth month. Okay, okay.
Yeah, essentially, yeah.
Okay. So maybe before jumping into the articles that you have written, you could tell us how this whole course ends. So second month is about reading something, especially something you have already read, something you really like. And then third and fourth month, you said that you start increasing the amount of hours you put in, or at least that's the aim of the course. How does that work exactly?
Well, at the end of 2 months, you can essentially read in a foreign language, right? Not super comfortable, but you can read it and you can understand things, and it gives you confidence to continue. Third month is essentially mass input. So yes, you up the hours, you try to spend as much time as possible reading, listening, and just being exposed to language, and basically improving reading and listening comprehension. I know, like, this is not a very common approach, perhaps, because I focus a lot on comprehension first before I even start speaking. It's a little bit of avoidance because I'm an introvert, and speaking in general is my like weakest skill in any language, including Russian, which is my native and only language, like mother tongue. I'm just I don't like small talk, which is the only thing you could do when you're just starting to learn a language. It's like, hey, I'm Alina, like I'm from Russia, I love Spanish. This is the only thing you can say, right? I don't like that. So I try to improve my comprehension so that I can understand native speakers with no problem. And then I start speaking with them, and it's, initially it's the use of hands and rudimental phrases, but then the more you enter in the same essentially conversations with people, the more comfortable you become speaking. And it again comes down to practice, 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 practice. So when I focus on speaking part, it's 30, 50, 60 hours a month of just speaking.
Okay. And
Yeah, with tutors.
With tutors, so you book classes on which platform?
So super interesting question, and I wish there was more of that. So for Spanish, Baselong, it's just amazing platform. So I think you pay about $200 a month for unlimited tutoring sessions, which kind of capitalizes on economic differences between US and the Latin America, but ultimately with the right approach you can get lots of speaking practice for very little money comparatively, because if you book a tutor from say Europe, it's going to be at least $20 an hour at least. There you pay $200 a month, and say you spend 20 hours, 40 hours
Yeah.
of speaking, and that comes down to $10 per hour of speaking. So you get a lot for very little money.
Okay, and for French?
For French, I think they same people, not sure, but I think that same people launched a similar platform. It's called, let me just quickly, um, I will send you the name. We will just enter it there. Yeah.
Okay. So in these last 2 months, you spend loads of hours speaking, and given that you have already had so much input, given that you have so many pieces of vocabulary in your head, you kind of understand how the language works. You just need to be able to practice speaking and to get better at it. And at the same time, you continue with all of the inputs that you were mentioning before, reading and listening. Okay. Okay, that's very interesting. So when are you thinking of launching this course? Is it already online available or?
So the first part, so the first 2 months already there. So that's called the novel formula. That's a separate course. And then we're launching the language formula. So the remaining 2 months focused on more focused on better comprehension and speaking per se in about a month. So
Okay, well, when people buy it, do they buy it for just one language or what it?
no, it's a meta learning course. That's the whole idea, because the same strategy works pretty much for everything. Like, you can reapply it to any language. The only caveat, well, there are several caveats, since it's very much reading based, you it's much easier to do this with alphabetic languages. And it can be a different alphabet, like it can be Russian, you just have to learn the alphabet. Yes, it's going to be more difficult because you're learning the alphabet and you're adjusting, same like for Greek, right? But the idea is the same, letter sound correspondence. It wouldn't work as well, as easily, I suppose, with languages like Chinese, Japanese, Arabic, where the writing system is like extremely different, right?
I see.
Because you would have to spend a ton of time on learning the writing system.
And what about the types of words, the list of 1,000 words that people have to learn in the first month? Do you provide them with a list? If yes, is that a frequency list? Or if you tell them just learn just learn 1,000 words in the target language, then do you tell them where to get a list from, or how does that go?
So I basically offer them a choice of different language learning apps based on their target language, because some languages are not available in some apps. The things like Serbian, for example, if you want to learn Serbian, you're going to have a harder time. And,
Hmm.
so I offer the choice of platforms, and I offer a choice of strategies for how to go about choosing a given platform or a given course, for example, for learning vocabulary. So I do not try to reinvent the wheel in terms of, there are apps that teach vocabulary and they're excellent. So there is no need really to do the whole thing again.
Hmm.
So yeah, it's just the use of external resources and in a smart way.